Alright, guys, catch it? Hello? Alright, thank you for everyone for coming to our first teaching. Basically this is part of Open Stellenbosch, and the point of the teachings is that before we address issues here at Stellenbosch such as the language policy, we need to understand the space that we're in and the complexities of the space. So you've got to be a conscious activist in order to actually, deal with the issues that we're dealing with here. And to understand that effectively, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are connected. So language is connected with race, and etc., etc. So the space we find ourselves is the BA building, what was formerly known as the PJ Forster building, but in the 1950s was known as a community known as devlakte. And basically there were forced removals here. And the descendants of those forced removals now live in Kayamandi in Krugersville. So it's very important to understand, first of all, the space that you find yourself in, the space that you're fighting against, and the fact that the crimes that have happened here, which were part and parcel of building apartheid and building the division that we have in this university, are still present, and we have to acknowledge them. So, as I said, the classes of trying to conscientize students about the space we're going are going to continue. This is the first one, so that you understand the history of this place. I'd like to introduce
Albert Groenman.
Yeah, Groenman, sorry. Professor Albert Groenman, who's from the history department here at the university, and has actually written about the forced removals of the devlakte. He's just going to conscientize us about the history.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. Does it work?
Yeah, it works.
Hello? Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Just a correction, I've been involved in an oral history of this area along with people from Krugersville and Ida's Valley. In that process one picks up a lot of historical detail which I'll talk about today. But before that point I welcome this opportunity, particularly as it deals with issues pertaining to heritage and issues pertaining to history. Now this may be a bit boring, but there is a conceptual difference between these two things. Heritage is not history. Heritage is the show business side of history. It prefers to convey a single message in an oversimplified way. At a particular historical juncture, when it made sense for people to do that. The world around monuments and statues changed, as we found out in Cape Town as well. And that means that monuments are under attack. But monuments can't talk back. History can't talk back. History is much more complicated, it is messy, it is also more nuanced. And what I want to present here today relates to that in a certain manner. This area which we occupy now, it used to be occupied by a man called Boetie Kannemeyer, who used to live here. He moved out of this area in the mid-60s. Now how did this happen? He was forced to move to Ida's Valley. This area was known, and wider than this area was known as the devlakte. Demarcated by Miller Street, Reineveld Street here, Banghoek Road, Spuds Road and Merriman, as well as Berg Street. It was proclaimed a white area in 1964. about 3,700 people lived in this area. And it wasn't colored, so-called colored people only, also some white people lived here. There were 6 schools, 4 churches, a mosque, a cinema, and 10 business enterprises. One out of every 3 so-called colored people that live in Stellenbosch has got used to have some kind of connection with the devlakte. Now, forced removals, of course, those weren't unique to Stellenbosch. In South Africa as a whole, 306,000 colored people were moved. 1 out of every 6 colored person had been moved. Most houses in this area were rented houses. Only about 20% of the people owned their own houses. But these houses were in good, habitable condition. It wasn't a slum area, as the National Party often proclaimed, particularly when it came to removals in areas like District 6. There was a clearly defined, about 20% of the population, a clearly defined upper class consisting of skilled workers and professional people. It is these people who were aspiring to get ahead in life who felt the removals most acutely, although by saying that one doesn't deny that the underclasses were also severely affected. Particularly traumatic was the closing of Nukov High School down next to the Voertuigvoer, which was the hub of the community. It was a very popular school. It had students coming in from what was known as Southwest Africa, today Namibia at the time, and there was a strict insistence on disciplined education. The school was also affected as they had to move to Iders Valley. It also meant that people were used to be close to the conveniences and the facilities in town, now to travel further to get to those. Now, what were the reasons for these removals? We've got to bear in mind that this was a nationalist town in the 1960s. It wasn't always so. In the 1930s and the 40s, the United Party had a sizable presence here, but the National Party consolidated its gains in the 1950s and particularly the 1960s. There was an almost obsessive classification of individuals, which underpinned the Group Areas Act. Now, this is one of the bedrock acts of apartheid. Group classification would pertinently affect the coloured community in the Western Cape in particular. Initially, when this bill was introduced in 1915, it was very hard to define people, and they thought that, okay, maybe there'll be 10,000 cases which they'll have to sort out in which category one belongs. Later on, they had to admit that there were more than 90,000 so-called, what they called borderline cases. It was somebody kind of unexpectedly, like Jan Smuts, who lost the election in 48, who really opposed this law most vehemently. He came from the Boerland, he understood the Boerland communities, and he said that the commission headed by Wilcox, R.W. Wilcox, after which the building is named, former rector, and also at 1937 heading a so-called coloured commission. Wilcox also warned against this, but Smuts said, don't mess with this thing, because it touches on matters that go very deep in this country. The failure to heed this warning would cast long shadows. And one would like to think, after all these years, I recently came across a book written by Jerry Murray, formerly from UKZN, which he called declassified. But in this country, after all these years, we still go on about classifying people in some way or the other. I think that is a broader kind of message that one should consider if we want to move ahead. Obviously, you'll find divisions amongst people, but often these divisions are also class-based. But we don't prefer to look at that. We prefer to look at what they appear as obvious, like the Nats did. They looked at what they appear obvious, and even the obvious wasn't that obvious then, as the 90,000 cases indicate. Now this, sorry, I'm a lecturer, I can't talk without paper. The interesting thing, as I've just touched on class then, was that white people in this town had much more in common with coloured people than they'd often like to admit. There was a cohesive linguistic unity, cohesive religious practices, as well as certain shared social practices. The National Party chose to downplay these similarities and to elevate colour as an overriding factor. Accordingly, the point was made that all white people, and more specifically Afrikaners, had to be demarcated as a specially race-conscious group. Now, since this segregation was a requirement, not because people were actually so different, but precisely because they were so similar, people had to be made different, and therefore they had to move. Now, that's the kind of background for what took place. What were the reactions to this? Interestingly enough, given the fact that 3,700 people were moved, you would at least expect some kind of response. But there was very little protest. One person elaborated, "We were very upset about this, but the people were not politically conscious in those days. They didn't have the vote to make their grievances known. Their hands were tied. And they were also dependent on officialdom to get them housing in Iders Valley or in Cluttersville." Some of those were very angry indeed, though, despite their apparent outward calm. When we interviewed these people, one of them said, "I was very angry and filled with hate. I couldn't contain this hate and disappointment. Just imagine for years you've built up your business together with your dad and other family members, and here they come to break you down." Women, of course, took great pride in their households and spend a lot of emotional energy on behalf of their families. Now these houses were simply demolished. One woman remembered, "It was terrible to see how they broke down our houses. I wouldn't even walk past there. And it was too sad to think that people's houses could be demolished just like that." And I've already referred to the Lukoff School and the way that was a cohesive factor in the community. That school, children the whole school had to be moved to Iders Valley as well and started up anew. And having said that, one has got to have some respect that despite these dislocations, a new community, although it was difficult, was built up again in places like Cluttersville and in Iders Valley. What was the role of Stellenbosch University in all of this? The university authorities generally went along with government policy, although, as I said, history is nuanced and messy. Certain individuals like Professor Erika Trom, she was Professor of Social Work at the university, and she also served on the town council, did have serious misgivings about the implementation of this. But as a rule, or as a general rule of thumb, the university people went along with this. What left a particular bad taste was the fact that the Lukoff School eventually ended up also in the hands of the university through a complicated arrangement. We are currently looking in more detail, and I've got students working on this, dealing with the role of Stellenbosch during the apartheid period. And what strikes me is that although there was considerable support for apartheid, there was also significant opposition to that. And I think people like Erika Tron, who I referred to earlier, she was one of those. And then one had people like Van Zyl Slabbert and others like him who also opposed the system. So what I want to tell you through that is that the history of this place is also more nuanced than one often thinks. To return where we are now, and to round this off, this building had been expropriated, and there were some negotiations between the university and the state and the provincial government about this area. The building was completed in 1980. It was called the B.J. Foster Building. Foster was the Chancellor of the university. He was also Prime Minister from 1966 to 1979. Foster was closely associated with apartheid during that period. Now, interestingly enough, this building, the name change took place as a result of opposition through staff members. And after a long bureaucratic process, the name changed in 2002 to the Arts and Social Science Building. So, at least on that level, things did change. But I'm of the opinion, though, that we need to know that it needs to be more publicly known what happened here before this building was erected. And to that effect, one would at least like to see a plaque here, and there's talk about a graphic information center or an exhibition at the entrance to this building, to clad this building with its own history. Already 2 years ago, we did the same with the Wilcox building, after the building burned down in 2010. And then it was thought that there must be some different memory of Stellenbosch. And part of the archives is a memory room which deals with the history I've been talking about this afternoon, and also other elements of Stellenbosch history which are less well known. And those of you interested are welcome to go to the archives at the in the corner of the Wilcox building. I think it's a good visual exhibition of this history which may enlighten you. Okay, thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor. I think, looking at this talk, one can kind of see the divisions of this town. You can see what previously been known as the white areas, the colored areas, and the black areas. And that kind of separation kind of stems from the forced removals that we have here. We're basically walking on that ground. So it's important to see the connection between the history of this place and our present today, and how our students interact with each other. Really, I think with that in mind, I would actually like for students here, because it's a teaching process, so you may have questions that you want answered, and I would ask that you either make a statement, you stand up and you make us aware of something, or you get to ask the professor about how exactly our presence here and the feeling you get from this university ties in with apartheid and such forced removals such as devlakte, and also maybe what you would like done in this place, what must commemorate the horrible things that actually happened in this place that affect us today. If anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand.
I don't know if I missed some facts now, but I just wanted to know why people were dependent on the government for where they had to move and where they had to live.
the government virtually controlled everything. It was like a total institution. It's hard to imagine now, but for somebody who grew up in that area, in that era, that the government also called you up to the army, and you couldn't resist that. So the government was powerful in that sense. I might just say about, it's been interesting. You mentioned some interesting facts here, or perceptions, or dimensions, and it's interesting also for me as an individual. I've been here 13 years, and initially, when I was about to go to university, I was asked where I would like to go. I said, no, I'd rather like to go and work. My father didn't think that was a good idea. He thought I was too lazy to do anything and I should get some kind of education. And he was at Stellenbosch and he thought that would be a good place. But that's after I've been to the army and I've been called up, and I didn't particularly like that. And he took me to Stellenbosch, and I told him at the time, this looks too much like an army light for me. It was, you had, in hostels you had initiation rites. It was very much a nationalistic place. It was very self-confident, supremely arrogant in many ways. And that made me go elsewhere to study. When I came back to Stellenbosch and was a much older man, I realized that this town it's still got some of those elements, but it's also got different elements. I've been to various universities, and what I see today here, and you may not like it, but this is actually a much more diverse group than we see at other universities, because these people come from different backgrounds. And that's another issue. We speak both languages on this campus. Other universities don't. Many of them don't. So in a way, Stellenbosch has also changed from its history. And we need to track that history. Not that I'm saying there aren't any vestiges left, but there have also been certain changes over the years, which should be acknowledged to make us conscious of where we are today. Yeah.
Hi, and thank you. I've got a few questions. I guess the first thing I want to just say is that there's more than 2 languages in this country. Just a point of clarification.
But only 2 academic languages.
Okay. So we do have writing and poetry in other languages too, though. Yeah. And anyway, this is a separate debate, and I want to ask you some questions around the forced removals. I know that the removals in District 6 took a long time. They actually, it took place over something like 10 years. And so what was the time period for the removals here, and how did they actually take place? Like, did they bring bulldozers? Like, what did it look like?
It was from roughly 1964 to 1970, so it took 6 years. Yes, and there were bulldozers involved. Yeah.
And I also just wanted to ask you your thoughts around like going beyond commemoration and thoughts about reparations for the people who were forcibly removed.
That has been raised, and that's a very difficult one. I don't want to trivialize that. It's come up when we did the book devlakte, in ons bloed, and it came up time and time again, and it's a complicated matter. It's been dealt with by management. I don't know how effectively, but I do think it's an issue that one can raise. I think it's a legitimate question. But one has also got to realize that there are practical issues and that history is messy. Afrikaners have got a claim back from the Anglo-Boer War. Where will that lead us? So there are all kinds of more complicated issues than it appears on the surface.
I'll take that now. But it's also to say, first of all, I think for a lot of us, this is the first time that we're hearing the history of this place. And so we know that the university just hasn't done enough to first of all highlight where we are. And so then I think also we should also start speaking as students about what should happen so that students can be conscientized about this place. And one, that the people who are still affected by those forced removals, because forced removals in themselves are a destabilizing process. I mean, if you look at the former District 6 and you look at neighborhoods such as, where people were moved, you can feel that destabilizing process. So we need to talk also about how do we rectify those issues and how do we expect the university to act according to that in response.
Hi, thanks very much. I won't use the microphone. Just to say that I think a space like this is very important, and what intrigued me in your discussion is that you speak about the borderline categories. It's almost as if there were mixed spaces, spaces of potential, spaces in between that an apartheid government foreclosed on. And it seems that it's possible through the kinds of engagements we are having here for people to meet again and to have conversations and to share ideas and to speak about these very important issues. So instead of, I don't know, perhaps I'm just a naive, romanticizing liberal, but instead of having this camp and that camp, already this initiative has brought together people into a space, and there is talking and there is listening, and perhaps there can also then be productive action to bring people together so that there are new spaces in which people can belong. Not through claiming, not through monumentalizing, but in small ways, in quiet ways, in accepting that there are different degrees of voices and different kinds of emphases, and that we listen.
Thank you. I think
I just want to know, how has the university specifically dealt with the reparation for those kids, the parents who were moved from here? How have can their children come study in the land in which they were born in? Like, how has the university dealt with that specifically?
There was talk of that, but I'm not involved in that issue. But there was talk of that.
Has there been action? Like, there's no talks, but has there been any action?
It's free for anyone to study here, yes. Not free, you have to pay, but you can come and study. But there has been talk of special bursaries, that I know. But I don't serve on that committee.
I think that's also one thing that we need to talk for as well. To say,
I think that was a good suggestion that was made. That is something that actually needs to be talked to as well. To say that the people, the students that come from that part of town actually be the ones that benefit most from this university, because this is their land here, right? I mean, we've got people that come from all over the world and now to come study here, and they get the benefit of this institution. But kids that are here in Karamani and Fruitersville will never ever see this institution, and that's unfair, especially that the university is in their town, it's in their space, you understand? So that's something that we must go for as students.
I just need to mention people from Kaimandi there were no people. There were people from Kaimandi that moved there.
One of the suggestions I think we could do, because the Western Cape has a big coloured and Muslim community. I grew up in Mitchell's Plain and I know that. And it's so set up here, language and culture. You can do like 2 African languages, English, and you can do Xhosa and Afrikaans, only 2 African languages offered. But you can do biblical Hebrew. You can do biblical Hebrew. I don't know how many people are in that class, but I don't know why Arabic is not offered in language and culture. We have a big Muslim colored community here. Why can't we offer Arabic too? You know what I'm saying? So that's one of the ways we can actually include people. because this area, the mosque is the only symbol, that proper symbol standing from devlakte time. And I thought I'd appreciate it if it offer Arabic in BA language and culture, you know, so that's my suggestion.
I think it's powerful because it's about rethinking the curriculum that we have here.
Well, they got Chinese now, but that's because of the money.
So my question regards not necessarily to only devlakte, but maybe from Professor Groenling a bit of clarity on the role which figures such as Kosi Gericke or Geges plays in the propagation of apartheid. Because I think oftentimes we focus on the groups and they're easy to take down, but something like the work which Kosi Gericke did in the suppression of information is, I think, much more insidious and difficult to root out.
Kosi Gericke is talking back to you. Gericke, because the building is named after him, he was a Dutch Reformed minister. He was also chairperson of the council for a while, I think from 1953. The man was not a great intellectual, and I'm always surprised to realize that a library has been named after him. He was once asked about his own library at home, and he told the person, I don't really have a library, but I once read a book. So he's not I don't think one can talk about the validity of having a library named after him. I think that was more to do with Broederbond connections at the time. Gigi Sillier, he was the second principal of the university from 1919 to 1925. He was very active in educational matters run to about 1947. He was never, that was at the time of segregation, so he didn't actually play a role in apartheid, which was only introduced later on. I got no problems with Sillier, he was a serious educator.
Any more questions?
Has anybody got any other questions before we close this discussion? Anybody in the background there want to speak? Okay. So tomorrow, the Open Stellenbosch Collective is going to be out here in front of this building, and we call on everybody here to join us. We are going to be standing up for justice for the community that has been forcibly removed from the space. We are also going to be having Reverend Adams, who is from the community, coming here to speak to us. And we will be focusing on the issue of racism and redress at Stellenbosch University and engaging with questions around forced removals. So please join us. It's from 12 until 2 tomorrow.
I just want to remind you, please don't look at the budget of the actual, no, I don't need that. Please just go and look at the budget for what the Stellenbosch municipality actually spends their money on. Because we're constantly talking about this stuff, but there is efforts to make reparation. And also I have to say that it's kind of strange, it's only the human faculties, social sciences, that it's always around our space that it's happening. I think we should rather move to some other part of campus too, when you want to have these discussions. Because I do feel that most of the problems do come from other sectors that don't quite understand. But why are we the only ones showing support? It's constantly here. So we need to rather move out to other spaces and suddenly ask everybody to simply come here to take part in that debate.
Okay, so we've got a question about why this is being held in this particular space, and that's because we are in fact on the side of forced removals right here, as Professor Groenling was just explaining to us. This area is what was devlakte, and so that's why, it's a symbolic site. So it's really important that we gather here in this space to remember that and to stand together against that form of injustice. We certainly do wish to have open conversations in other spaces on campus, And so watch out for some notices about that. Thank you.
So basically we've come to the end of our of what we call the teaching. What we're going to try to do is just occupy spaces like this, so that it's open to the public. Now we started with this topic because we thought it was relevant now, but we're going to try to have a teaching at least once a week. If you have a topic that you'd like to speak about, that you'd like to educate our campus about, to get our campus more involved in, or we know someone that can speak on behalf of that topic, please ask that you actually come to us and you speak about. Come to me. My name is Kule Duma, and we can basically speak about how the next session should go. Or you can go to Facebook, Open Stellenbosch, and then you can post there as well. You can also email openstellenbosch at openstellenbosch@gmail.com.
Thanks. A lot of you have spoken about the lack of redress for the community, and it's something which I feel quite strongly about. So in order to get that conversation going, the 26th of July will be the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Andringa Street. And what we're planning to do at this stage is to, on the 75th anniversary, to have a memorial event in St. Paul's, which used to be the old Folks Gap, where we'll bring together various stakeholders from the university and from the community to start discussing what the road forward will be, and also to give recognition to the event and what happened. So come speak to me if you want to be involved in something like that. It's basically completely independent, just with the university's division for community interaction. Thanks. So the Battle of Andringa Street happened, if I have it correctly, the 26th of July 1940, where students from the university clashed with residents of the community of Andringa Street, and battle is kind of the appropriate word for what happened. Everything from windows being smashed, people being chased out of their homes. And a few years ago, one of the residents of Stellenbosch apologized for their role, and that kind of started the conversation where people realized that institutions at the university were involved in that, but it's something which was never recognized per se from the university before the project started. And as Professor Fruman said, the memorial room in the Wilcox Center is partly dedicated to that process.
I know you want to close up, but I have a question about the some of these families are still living in the surrounding areas, and I know, Adrian, you mentioned that you know someone quite well. In terms of justice, because we've mentioned now that the university management has looked at reparations in some regard, what is the sentiment from these families? Do they feel like justice has been done? Are they happy with the current situation, or what is it that they would like done? Can anybody speak on that? And it need not be you, Professor, but if you have something to say on that.
I think you can talk. We can talk about it afterwards. If you know,
But if you have anything on that, then please say
Uh,
that.
I think it is not for us to judge on these things. As you suggest, it is important for people who've been directly affected. And there are families, I can think offhand about Hilton Biscom and his family. They used to live 2 houses away from here. He's a good man to talk to, and he was instrumental in our book. So there are families, and I think they need to be consulted.
So we're going to cut it off there. Tomorrow, please join us tomorrow, where we'll at the mass meeting that's going to be happening, where we're actually going to be able to actually hold the university accountable for the involvement in basically displacing people's lives. We wanted today for people to hear what has happened, to go think about what has happened, and understand that the space that you're in, the history of the space that you're in, and how it still has an effect on you today. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Dank je voor je tijd.
Is het daar groot? Is daar een? Nee, but
Ja.
okay.
Are you off with that?